is if the reason why the Arab is mishabed himself to pay back loan even though he didn't receive any funds, is it because it's just Taivas Hana, which is the pashtus of what Rashi seems to be saying, that's the Taivas Hana, but there are Rishonim for sure that learn that we actually look at it like the Arab received the kesef that was given to the Leiva. So it's not so posh. It's actually a machlokes Rishonim. There's a whole stickle in the stapler. Okay, we are up to the bottom line on Daf Chesed Beis. Hahu gaver davakomazvin chumri paschaisa. Rashi says it was like some type of glass beads that they used to sell in strings. Butainish to oisin shel bedil is, I'm not sure what bedil is. I thought it was glass, but I'm not sure what bedil is. V'chorzen harbe mem b'chut echad. You put a strand through them. You make a necklace out of it. And they would carry them on their necks to sell. Oh, so bedil, I think, is lead. So Rashi Shechem shot is glass. Dakim, like small little rings. So he was making some type of costume jewelry. Also, a lady came over and said, Amalei, give me one strand. Amalei told her, will you become mikudeshes to me if I give you the strand? Amalei, she told him, just give it to me. If he gave it to her, it does not mean that she accepted his proposal. He was drinking wine in a store, in a restaurant. A woman walked by. She told him, Havali kasa, please give me a glass of wine. He told her, if I give it to you, would you become a kudeshes to me? Just give me the drink. And a third story. He was at the top of a tree throwing down dates. He was harvesting. A woman walked by. She told him, please throw me 2 dates. She wanted to have a date with him. And he told her, and again she said, just send it down already. Rav Zvid said, so in each of these 3 cases, Hava Mahava, give me, or Ashkoya Ashkechon, allow me to drink, or Shadi Mishta, throw it down, either one of these terms do not display a willingness on the lady's part to accept the Kiddushin. What if she didn't say Hava Mahava? She just said, Hav, give it to me. Or instead of using a double Lashon, Ashkoya Ashkon, she just said Ashki. Or by the Samorim that the fellow was thrown down, he just said Shadi. Mao, does that mean that she wants to accept Kiddushin? So Rashi is like Kafalsa de Dibura. She didn't use a double Lashon, she used a single Lashon. Maybe that's not a Lashon of rejection, maybe that's a Lashon of acceptance. Amarvina Mikudeshes, in fact, it would be Mikudeshes. But Rab Sama by Raksa Amar, Tago de Malka, I'm swearing on the crown of the king. Aina Mikudeshes. She's not Mikudeshes. And now to round up the whole sugya of what we learned in the past couple of days, the Hilchas are Aina Mikudeshes. When she says Hav, or Shadi, or Ashki, in either of these cases, she is not Mikudeshes. The Hilchas are Shiroi, Loi Tzrich Hashuma. We pass like Rava, like Rabba, that Shiroi, if you're being Mekadesh a woman with something that it's not clear what its value is, it's still going to be Mekudeshes as long as ultimately it has the value that it's supposed to have. The Hilchot of Rabbi Elazar, thank you so much. The Hilchot of Rabbi Elazar, and the Allah is like Rabbi Elazar, as Rashi says, that Skachli, B'mana, B'notzon la dinner, Harezim Mekudeshes v'yashlim, meaning if he says be Mekudeshes to me with a dinner, and he gives her with a mana, I'm sorry, he should be Mekudeshes to me with a mana, and he gives her a dinner and she accepts it, we fartaich it as meaning not that the kesef Kiddushin will be a mana, the kesef Kiddushin will be with whatever. The mana is a tanai that if I give you a mana, me'achshav the Kiddushin will be chal. So we pass like Rabbi Elazar in that halacha. The hilchos of Karava Amar of Nachman, as Rashi says, that mana ain't kan, mashkan ain't kan. If a person tells a woman, I am going to be mekadosh with a mana, I don't have the cash with me, here's a mashkin for it, that's not mikudeshes, because at that time, he hasn't given her anything at all. Okay, so that sort of rounds up the psak halacha of the sugyas that we learned in the last couple of days. So there's some interesting things that Tosfos shares over here. Thank you, Moti. Okay. No, it's fine. So Tosfos asks an important kasha. In either case, have ashki v'shodi, the Gemara says, are any mukadeshes. In time of fact, Tosfos, migara mitain mois leploni, the mukadeshes. Why is this any different than the principle of Arev? When she said give the money to Pliny, which is an Arev, we say it would be a good Kiddushin. So here, if she says give it to me, why would you say it's not a good Kiddushin? The Shlomo Tosfos is a very big difference. The shiny hacha, the meikara haisha shoyeles, shaloi b'teres Kiddushin. Because when she originally approached him, first of all, she approached him, and she just wanted a drink. She just wanted some dates, or she just wanted some of these beads, but she never wanted kedusha. Have adated the mikar come. I know I don't want to become mikudeshes to you. I just want you to give me one of these. But in the case where he comes over to her and he says harayat mikudeshes li with this money, and she says give it to Pliny, that's a whole different story. There she might in fact be accepting the proposal. Okay. This is another interesting Tosfos because we actually ran into this several times in the last little while. Did you notice how sometimes the Gemara says the halacha is like a certain posik, and sometimes it just talks about the issue? Let's look at that again. So when we're discussing Hav Ashki V'Shadi, it doesn't say who we're pasking like. It doesn't say halacha krab sama barakta. It says Ein Mukudeshes, right? That's like Rova, like Rabba, but it doesn't say like Rabba. And this is so Tosfos want to know why sometimes does the Gemara paskin like the issue, and sometimes the Gemara paskin like the person. So, in fact, Tosfos, that's not Tosfos' first question, but it'll come out soon. We know there's a rule: you always paskin like Rabba against Rabbi Yosef, except for 3 different cases. And one of those cases we ran into in Gittin, I think. V'yesh mefarshim, that's dafka b'midah b'vasra, but things in other mesechtas we don't by default pass like Rabbah. That's where we had to pass like Rabbah. But here, Tosfos says something interesting. Tosfos wants to bring a raya that maybe the halacha like Rabbah everywhere, not only here. So let's go on. So here we go. The mashma b'ho dafka v'loy b'chul gemor miu kasha. Ma'ila kamer be'edya hilchos hakavasei derabba. Why didn't in our sugya? Why didn't the Gemara identify that we're passing like Rabbah, who holds that you don't need shuma? Kedu amar halacha Rabbi Elazar, halacha hilchos karava amar of Nachman. So why in this case did the Gemara not just say halacha karab? The davka shiroi who the lotzrichi shuma. You know, when we learned the sugya of shuma, right away it popped up. We also are mekadosh women with a ring. A ring also requires shuma. If there's even a thought to say that you have to define its value, so how do we use a Kiddushin ring? There's no price tag on it when you give it to the kala, right? So why isn't there a problem with shuma? How come the Masad Kiddushin doesn't ask, how much does this cost? We need 3 jewelers right up here to evaluate this Kiddushin ring before we give it to her, right? Now we pass on like Trichishu, we pass like Rabbah, that it wouldn't be necessary. But there's a sheet that holds, even if you know it's more than a fruit, you have to know what it's worth. Right. That's right, because in the second nusach, it could be it has to be defined, its value. So the davka shiroyu hu de la trichi shuma. It's only by shiroyin where you don't need shuma. So we might not be paskening across the board that you never need shuma. Shiroi don't need shuma. You know why? Lefisha shumason you do ksas. People, I guess, in those days were familiar with the value of silk, and therefore ve'ein regilon litus boy kolkach. It's not likely that people will be mistaken, at least in its general value. They'll get it, and the price is right. They might be the closest price without going over it. They might win the showcase showdown. Aval shar dvarim, but other types of products, to go in avonim toivos umargolios, like gems and precious stones, sheyesh she'enim toivos, elamaat. Sometimes people aren't, certain precious stones aren't so good, but to an amateur, to a layman's eye, he wouldn't be able to tell the difference. You're not going to make a mistake about 10% of its value. You might over-evaluate something by multiples. Or the opposite way, there, in fact, even everybody agrees, so what we're saying is we're not really paskening like Rabbah, that you never need shuma. The Gemara here is saying in the case of Shiroi, we'll agree with Rabbah, but not like shuma. But when we're talking about precious stones, she will never be soymech das unless there's an appraisal there, because she has no idea what she's getting. And if it's a wiggle room, I might be getting 20% less than what I think, that I'll accept. But if I might be getting 10% of what I think, that's something that she wouldn't be comfortable with. And here's where it comes halacha l'maisa. Ulufichach nohagu ha'olam lekadesh b'tabas she'ein ba'even. Baruch Hashem, for people who marry have sons, because there's a minig that you don't give a diamond ring, another one it wasn't a shaila of when to give it. It was zicha means both. There's no such thing as either or. When you buy matons, there's ever either or. So lefichach nohagu olam lekadesh b'tabas she'ein ba'even. That's where the minig comes from, that a wedding band has to be simple, so that there's no fear that there could be a vastly varying estimate of what its value is. Okay, that's already vital. But that's what I wanted to bring out, that the makar of why we use very simple wedding rings is because we also be'etzim hold you need shuma, and the Gemara only passes like Rabbah that you don't need shuma by something that's pretty easy to evaluate. And the wedding band is just gold. That's something that's much easier to evaluate. If it's intricate, it has design, it has precious stones, it becomes a real problem because it could be perceived with a very different value from a layman versus a pro. Okay. Zogt the Heilige Gemara weiter. Hadrabanan. Bishtar Ketzad. How does the kinyan of shtar work when someone wants to marry a woman? Kosav lo ala niyar ay ala cheres. You write on a piece of paper or on a shard, afal pi she'ein bo shava pruta, even if there's no value in the paper itself, so it's not kinyan kesef here. And what do you write? Vitcha mikudeshesli, vitcha meuresesli, vitcha lila into haresa mikudeshes. It's interesting, the Gemara later on doesn't say this, but it's interesting that when we're giving an example of Kiddushin, we're giving the example of someone being Mekadosh Tana, and he's giving the shtar to the father. It could be that was the norm in those days, that girls got married, their fathers married them off before they were adults. So that was the typical way. Because from our perspective, the typical way is to give it to the lady herself. I mean, the Gemara later on quotes a brisa that says one or the other. But it sounds like almost like that was the default. So something as clear as this can also be a matter of machlokes. So let's look at Rashi about how the shtar works. Let's see if we have it over here. Okay, no, it doesn't say anything over here. So it's Tosfos that addresses it. So Tosfos says, mashma the shtar kosher ala cheres. It's mashma that if you write a shtar on a shard, it would be kosher, because this is an example of Kiddushin shtar. But Tosfos brings a raya from certain Gemaras that you would not be able to use cheres as a shtar. On a piece of paper, if there's some change made, it would be clear. There's security features. You could tell it was rubbed out. On cheres, you cannot. So there's a whole shayla b'chalal. Tosfos discusses whether or not you can ever use cheres for a star. So it's possible that he only used it for gittin or for Kiddushin, but he wouldn't use it for an actual momentalistic star. So there's a shayla b'tziachal is dive. Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara weiter. Maskef law, Reb Zeir bar Mamel. Haloidami hai star l'shtar zavini. This star is not the same structure as a star of a sale. Because Hossam, who writes the star of a sale? If someone's selling a piece of kaka, Reuven selling kaka to Shimon, Moicher koisav loy, Reuven will write Sadi Milchurla. He'll write a star to Shimon saying that my field should be sold to you. That's how the transaction works. But Hacha, Baal koisav, it's the father, it's the husband that's writing Bidcha Mekudesh Li. So by a regular sale, the seller is writing the star to the buyer. But by Kiddushin, it's the buyer who's writing the star to the seller. Zok to Gemara, Amarava, it's not really different at all. In either case, we're following the structure of the pasuk. Now, just to be clear, Rashi says, what's the big problem if the star is written from the moicher to the lakeich or from the lakeich to the moicher? So Rashi says the problem is when we know long the chiyagavna have a star. How do we know b'chalal that this is a normal star? How do we know that's a kosher star? It doesn't say anywhere. We might have a limud that you could be kind of a woman with a star, but how do you know that you're writing the star properly? Maybe the star has to be written from the father to the husband. So Dr. Gemara, it's all because of the pasuk. Pasuk Ksiv, when it's talking about selling property, it says umochar me'achuz asay. So who are we looking at? Who does the Torah look at in a sale of a field? The Torah is looking at the main actor as the seller. The moicher toler rachmana, so it's logical that the moicher should be writing the star. But whenever the Torah looks at Kiddushin, the Torah is looking primarily at the buyer. Because it says kiyikach, be'bal toler rachman. Zok to Gemara, if that's what it's all about, but I saw this as well. Sometimes the Torah talks about the perspective of the buyer. Hasam namiksiv sadois b'kesef yiknu. With kesef, you will buy a field. That's definitely the perspective of the buyer. And here's where I need an arc scroll. Karibe yaknu. Yaknu means elotzach kaifin. In other words, I am the seller letting you buy it. So yaknu is the seller's perspective of the buyer buying it. I think that's an arc scroll. Yaknu, right? Or yikanu. What in the English it says yaknu. It's either yiknu or yaknu, the pasuk, right? Huh? The yiknu is how we read it. Kariba yaknu, right? Yaknu. Yaknu. Yom Tov's coming. We have to remember yakna. So there, yaknu. So Bayut says yekanu. On the Karibe yekanu.
They write it in. There's
what
even
about the yud? What's under the yud? Okay. So we have a difference between the Hebrew article and the English article. What the right expression of Hebrew is. Just.
In English they write yaknu and then in brackets rather than yiknu.
Right. But Shloimi's
but it's
blue
vowelized yaknu in Hebrew.
But by Shloimi's blue, he has the blue arch scroll. It says yekanu for the other lotion. Because Dr. Gemara, so kriba yekanu, my timer krisba yekanu, mishum dechsiv umochar hachanami kribe ki yokach. What's the lotion of yikach? Could be from the perspective of the other guy. What yakach? There's yakach by you also on the blue one. So yakach also means it's from the perspective of the father giving over his daughter. So the question is, you have your pasuk that says kiyikach, and that's why you're telling me the star should be written from the perspective of the Baal. Maybe adrabah, maybe it's kiyakach. You sometimes find the Torah talks about a marriage from the perspective of the father. El Amarava, Zaktrava, we have psukim azoi, we have psukim azoi. The reason why we write the shtaris this way is hilchas inenu bas mechinu rabban nakroi. Break Tosfos. If the star of Kiddushin is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, why do we need a pasuk for it? But the Chazokim mentioned those psukim before, Kavachomers and Matzadz, it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Zok Tosfos, the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, Taim Zok Tosfos, even the halacha denu, even the hilchas denu, lama likra, the v'yatzav ha'isa, so each and niklas b'shtar. Yishloimer the shtar mecher l'chud hava hilchasa. It's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai to write a shtar mechira from the perspective of the seller to the buyer. Ushtar Kiddushin nafki michiyigach the Baal Koisvoi the Dami Lamech. So it's very, very interesting because you find that using a hekesh of a Yotzav Isa, you're learning information. You're learning information from Gittin. You're learning from Gittin. But Havilchzo Ushtar Kiddushin nafki michiyigach the Baal Koisvoi the Dami Lamecher. Okay, the Alpha Gav, the Hilchos Ninu, Loshen Rabbim, right? It doesn't say Halach Ninu. It says Hilchos Ninu, which would indicate that we're talking about both stars are Halach L'Moshe Sinai, La Vatervoikon. Beautiful. So the Halach L'Moshe Sinai is really only on the star Mecher. We only know star Kinyan, star Kiddushin from Gershon, and how it's structured, that we don't necessarily learn from the Halach L'Moshe Sinai. The way we know that there is something called Shtar Kiddushin is from Gittin, from Yotzav Isa. That's what the Gemara said it there. But I guess how the Shtar should be written, we're learning it from Echer. So there's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that tells you how to write a Shtar Mecher, but there's no halacha l'Moshe Sinai that tells you how a Shtar Kiddushin should be written. Right? We learn from Yotzav Isa how it should be structured.
So that's how we blind. That it has to be done from the perspective of the seller.
I'm sorry. Could you say that again?
Yeah. So you said, see, in our culture, somebody makes an offer. So the buyer makes an offer, right? And the seller responds. So you're saying that by Kiddushin, if it's a shtar, so it's done from the perspective of the father.
The buyer. No, it's Arayat Mekudeshesli. It's done from the perspective of the buyer.
The shtar. Didn't you just
the
say that?
Says Arayat Mekudeshesli. It's the buyer making the proposal to the seller.
Okay, I thought you said just the opposite a minute ago.
And by mecher, by a field, it's the seller selling it to the buyer. So by a field, it's this field should be sold to you. It's the moicher talking.
So we don't learn from the field to the Kiddushin.
I don't think so, because it's a different type of star, right? The source of Kiddushin star is from Gittin. Nothing. The Gemara just asked the kasha. We know this is a normal way to write things when you write a shtar mechira. So doesn't it make sense to say that should be the same way you buy a wife? It should be written from the perspective of the mecher. Zok the Gemara, no. There's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai how a shtar mecher is written, and the way a shtar kedushin is written is completely different. That we learn from the Yotzav Ha'isa, which is always just like the get is written from the perspective of the husband. So too the kedushin is written from the perspective of the husband. Correct. Correct. Right. Correct. No, it must be halacha l'Moshe Sinai because that was Tosfos. Yeah, because that was Tosfos' kasha. If you learn the lashon, by Kiddushin, so then by default you also know that there's something called Kiddushin star. So what I need the Yotzav Ha'isa. And that was Tosfos' kasha. If the halacha l'Moshe Sinai is applying to Kiddushin to tell you how you express it in the star, so that by default it's also telling you that a star is a viable option. So I don't need the Yotzav Ha'isa. So that's what Tosfos had to say, that halacha l'Moshe Sinai only for Kinyan, and once there's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai about how to do it, by definition, it's telling you that it works. It must work. I think that would be built into the halacha l'mashim. No, isn't that what Tosfos Kasha is lagabi Kiddushin? That tells you how to write a star Kiddushin. So then by default, I know that there's a star Kiddushin. So why do I need the whole limit of Yotzav Haisa? So that's what the Gemara says right over here. The Gemara says Vasbechinu, but that's only legabe the mecher. Really, it's halacha l'mashim. We're bringing psukim to support how it's written. It's only asbechinu, and that's why there's psukim this way, that way. We pick this way because this is what halacha l'mashim said. So this is an interesting pasuk that Rashi actually talks about. And Rashi is going to tell us what this was talking about. Alma, you see, you have a pasuk in Navi that tells us that when you sell property, it's always the seller that's selling the property. And this is a more explicit pasuk, because till now we were bringing psukim that just talks about the general transaction of a sale from whose perspective it is. But in this story in the Navi, we were actually speaking about a star mechira of a field. And it says, "Beferish ve'ekach hasefer hamikna, ve'ekach v'loy be'etei." I will take, but I'm not going to give. Alma hamoicher nosnoi liloikeach. You see clearly that the moicher gave it to the lekeach. D'chsiv ve'ekach v'loy ksiv ve'etei. V'Yirmiyahu hayakoina es hasoda miyat chanamel. In this story, Yirmiyahu was buying a field from Chanamel. Alma, you see there that moicher kasev sadi muchur loch v'noisen biyad lekeach. Ve'ekach hasefer hamikna, as the buyer, I took the star, meaning it was given to me by the seller. So this, in this pasuk in Navi, is the only place where it's directly addressing a transaction of a mechiras karka with the star. And there it was quite clear that the moicher wrote the star and gave it to Yirmiyahu, who was the lakeach. So all the other psukim are just talking about general sadis, because if you're talking about sale in general, from whose perspective we're talking about. But here it's black and white in the Navi that a sale of a property, it's always the moicher giving the star to the lakeach. If you wrote on the Niyar and Al-Cheres, and here is where the Gemara says it the other way, Bein al yidei aviyah, bein al yidei atzma mikudeshes. What does al yidei atzma means? Shekabolta hi midai shalav. This is a case where she's still a ktana. She's still a ktana. And it's still the father making the decisions, but physically he gave it to her, but she accepted it, but she required the das of her av because she was still a ktana. Mikudeshes. Midai toy. But for Hushaloi Bogra, that's of course if she's not an adult yet. Because once she's an adult, of course, it's completely up to her. So this is would be more classical to us. There, even if the father was makabel, it has to be only midaita v'usha bagra, as Rashi says. She instructed her father lekabel. Why do we need her das? Because she's now an adult, and her father does not have any control over her Kiddushin. So you found a generic star erison that was written from Yaakov to Rachel, and said, "Hey, my name is Yaakov. I actually want to marry a woman, Rachel. Let me buy this star. I'll use it." Now we know by Gershon it would definitely not work, right? The Sefer had to write it specifically for this and this Isha. Do you have that same requirement by Kiddushin? Mao, Havayis Tus Makshinon. You compare Gershon to Kiddushin, Ma Yitzia, just like by Gershon, you need Yitzia Be'inin Lashma. By Yitzia Be'inin Lashma, it has to be written Lashma. Af Havaya Be'inin Lashma, Idilma Havayis Ladodi Makshinon. You don't compare the Havaya Yitzia, you compare the different methods of Kiddushin. Ma Havaya, the Kesef Lo Boy Lashma. You didn't need that when they minted this coin. It was specifically minted for this Kiddushin for this woman. Afavaya, unless you want to marry the Queen of England, it wasn't binted l'shma, right? Af avai the star loy ba'inin l'shma. Zok Gemara Basar the boy had a pashta havai litzim akshinon. We give precedence to the hekesh from Gershon to Kiddushin, and therefore it needs to be l'shma. So star Kiddushin has to be written in l'shma as well. Itmar kasvei l'shma bat v'shaloi midaita. I wanted to be mekadosh this woman. She had no interest whatsoever in marrying me. By a get, if I want to divorce my wife and she doesn't even know about it, she doesn't want to be divorced, I could still have the cipher write up a get, and it'll be a perfectly kosher get because nobody's asking her opinion when it comes to her getting a get. How about Kiddushin? Does she have to be a willing participant in order that the star should be a good star? Rava v'Ravina Amri mikudeshes, she will be mikudeshes. Okay, and then your papa Ravi Amri ain't a mikudeshes. She's not. It's not a good Kiddushin. Amr Papa said, "Aima time to do, but aima time to do." I'm an open-minded person. I understand my perspective, but I'm also going to explain to you the perspective of Rava and Ravina. Aima time to do. First, let's explain to you why Rava and Ravina felt it would be a good Kiddushin. If we're learning it from Gershon, by Gershon, as long as it's written Lishma, it doesn't have to be written Midaito because she needs to accept the get even Balkarcha. However, but Tucker Papa, I feel it needs to be Ladaita, Midaito when you write a star Kiddushin. Why? Because I also agree of a Yotz of a Haisa. And I also agree Makashavai Yitzia. But I look at it from a different perspective. My Yitzia, but in Das Makna, just talk about get. Whose das do you need when you write the star? The das of the person who's giving up. That's the husband. Afavaya be'inin das makna. By the star kedushin, you also need das of the makna. But the das of the makna is the woman in the case of a star kedushin. Meis v'efektimar. Ein kaisen story erison v'nesuin elamidashne. You cannot write story erison and nesuin unless they're both maskim. So my love story erison v'nesuin mamish. So this is a checkmate against Rava and Ravina. It just means story psikta. It just means Rashi's hatnoim shebeneim umamin shaposhkin zelazeh. It used to be that any of the financial obligations that were decided upon between the Chassan side and the Kala side were recorded in a star. You should not record anything until it's actually made up. So in other words, the Chassan is planning to ask them, the Mechitin for 10 years full support at $5,000 a month with a Lexus and a vacation of the year and in Sukkot in Israel. So you don't write that up before you come to meet the Mechatanim and say, sign here. You're not allowed to write it up. After you discuss it with the Mechatanim, then you can write it up. And you can tell the guy, if you don't sign this, I'm going to have to write it over again. It's not worth it. I would normally be Mvata, but I wrote it up already. You got to sign it as is. Right? So Zog to Gemara, that's what it's referring to. The Kala side asked the Chazan side, so what type of support are you going to give your son? Kach v'kach. So then the father of the boy asks, Lebitcha, kach v'kach. And if right after they had that discussion, before anything was recorded, they just merely discussed it, and Amdu v'kitchu, they got up and they made the Kiddushin right away. According to Rashi, it means they did it right away. According to other Rishonim, not necessarily. Kanu, that is legal tender. That's mechayiv each party to deliver on what they said. These are the things that are niknin ba'amira. I guess so, yeah. So the Minchas HaLoser, the Minkat Shuruv said that when people discuss a shidduch and they stick to the upmach that they made, there's a cruise. It's that amira. If everyone's honest and sticks to their commitments, then we can be sure that you're zoicha to your real zivig, the zivig that was oiskerifin already in Shemayim earlier. I guess they had these problems in those days too. Minchas don't need to encourage people to keep their words. Oh, the guests would pledge. It was like a cash bar? Really? My favorite story is the story of Hutner. You see what an emes tzaddik is. Everybody has this default that Chaim Berlin is only interested in money. But I'm going to tell you a story with a Moedik match with a Hutner. In the 50s, when people got married, so the chassan met the kala, the parents couldn't meet, they couldn't even afford to speak on the phone. Things were primitive in those days. So it wasn't unusual where when the chassan's parents were coming to the actual vort, that's the first time they would meet and they would have their discussions there. So that's exactly what happened. There was going to be an engagement, and the parents came from wherever they came, and they come into the house, and there's going to be an engagement. They discussed already. Everything was discussed. There's going to be an engagement. What happened was to the vort, who comes? The Rosh Hashiva. Rav Hutner comes. Hutner comes to the vort, and he goes into a room. He said, let me consult with my Talmud. They go into a private room, him and the Talmud, and the mother and the father. And Rav Hutner comes out, and he tells the father of the Kala, so of course you're going to be giving, this is in the 50s, you're going to be giving $1,000 a month for 10 years. So the father of the Kala is like feeling very uncomfortable. It's a little off-putting. And he says, don't worry, Yoshiva, we already took care of the Chamam. It's all taken care of. He says, you might have taken care of it with them, but this is my Talmud. I also have a horse in this race. I need to know that my Talmud that can sit and learn. $1,000 a month, 10 years. So the fellow at the Yeshiva, with all the respect, that's a lot of money. I can't afford to do that. I barely earned that much money. So the Yeshiva said, I can't let my Talmud marry somebody. Then what's going to be? I'm sorry. If you cannot zog to $1,000 a month for the next 10 years, I can't let my chassan do the shidduch. So the father said, but Yeshiva, we're ready. How can you do this to us? Father, sorry. Come, we're leaving. And he took the parents and he took the boy, and the shidduch was off. So you're appalled. You choked to hear the story. No wonder. Anyway, fast forward 35, 40 years later, where they were both happily married to their own spouses. They built families, but both sets of parents had already died. And the boy who Hutner pulled him out said, now I'm going to tell you the real story. When my mother walked in and met the woman was her couple. And the woman used to beat her to death in Auschwitz, because they were just fresh out of Auschwitz. It was in the 50s. And my mother said, I can't do the shidduch, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to destroy a family. So what should I do? So the mother of the boy said that the mother of the girl was a couple. She used to beat me. She used to kill me. She was a Ritzayach. I can't be Mishadach with this lady. How can I be Mishadach with this lady? But I don't want to say this publicly. This poor girl, it's not her fault. So what should I do? I can't do the shidduch. So Rav Hutner says, leave it to me. So Rav Hutner took Shmutz gemacht with no hope of ever getting clean from the Shmutz. He was willing to take the full brunt of public opinion because he wanted to save this. Not to be used. So they didn't realize that they were actually trying to save this family the embarrassment of having that come out about it. Fascinating story. That's why whenever you have some Chaim Berlin who asks his mechid for an exorbitant amount, and they says no, the shidduch falls apart. He says, "Names how does it tell me to go?" Dr. Gemara, Ubabia. We know how do we know that Bia works, but that we already had psukim, right? Did not we not kigach ish isha ubala? But here the Gemara is asking for an alternative shot. How do we know that Bia works? Minolan, just like we had with Kesef, we had the pasuk of kigach kigach Ephraim. We had Yatzachim and Kasef. So there's different limudim we learn from each one. So we know how do we know that Kiddushin could be with Bia? So this is not the same limud that we had before of Kigach Ish Ishbala. It's talking about so we learned it from Sarah that there's something called Kiddushay Bia. How did she become? How did Avram become her Baal? Al Yidei Be'ila. What you don't like the pshat that we already had of Kigach Isha Ubala Malamet Shenikos Babia. Why do you need to bring this raya from Avram Avinu? Even Halsam, if I only had the pasuk of Avram Avinu, I would have thought. I'm sorry, if I would have only had the pasuk of ki yigach ish ishu bala, I would have not known that you could be mekadosh with bia. I would have thought in order to have a Kiddushin, you need kesef and bia. Adam mekadosh v'adar bal. I would think that Kiddushin has two components. Side the Kiddushin kesef and the bia, and that's what creates a Kiddushin. We need both. Kamash alone, vibulas bal, that bia alone can do Kiddushin, which means vibulas bal is teaching us two things. It's teaching us that bia alone could do Kiddushin, and it's also teaching us that the higach over there, that kesef alone could do Kiddushin. Right? Because by definition, if you would have thought that higach ish bala means it's a two-part Kiddushin, that means kesef can't do it either by itself. But now that we've shown you that bia alone is good, then we could also see that kicha with kesef alone is good. Matzkav Rababa bar Mamo. In Cain, naira hamurasa, a naira hamurasa only gets skila if she's a basula. So naira hamurasa, the Amar Rachmana Beskila, how could you suggest, even as a Havamina, that you would need to have both a Kedusha Kesef plus a Bia in order for a woman to be considered Mikudeshes? If that was the case, how could you ever have a woman who is Mikudeshes who's a Basula? It doesn't make sense. Because by definition, in order for her to be Mikudeshes, she has to be a Ba'ula. Ida Akdish, for Hadar Bol, if there was Kedushin done, and in the Havamina, if it would have said you would think you need kesef and bia, then ba'ulahi. And the ida aktish v'loibal, if he only make kedusha kesef and not bia, lav klumu. According to you, the way you understand the puzzle of it wouldn't be kedushin yet. It would be an incomplete kedushin. No problem. You know how he was kind of here with bia? Mishkachas la kigoyin shabala or shaloi kadarka. He made a bia. He was kind of shaloi kadarka, but she's still technically a basula. I can't like Peligi Rabbi for Rabbanon. Now let's go back to the machlokes between Rabbi and the Rabbanon. Rabbi and the Rabbanon, I'm sorry? Yeah, no, you said if we would only have the pasuk of Ki Yigach Ish Ishu Bala, you would think you need both. Right, Gemara, why would you think you need both? You should be able to bring a raya from the parsha of Na'am Urasa that of course one alone will be enough. And if Kesef would have been enough, then obviously Bia also would have to be enough on its own as well. So Dr. Gemara, I can like Rabbi for Rabbanan, and we're going to have an interesting machlokes that the Gemara is about to quote with Rabbi and the Rabbanan. Ela ba'acher, a stranger who's ba on a woman shaloi kedarka does not make her into a ba'ula. Aval baal, but if her husband is boiler shaloi kedarka, divrei akoil in boiler shaloi kedarka also ba'ula. So, Frank the Gemara, how could you say that she's still a basula? Because when her husband made the bia to be kind to her, to finalize the Kiddushin, it was Shaloi Kedarka. A husband's bia of Shaloi Kedarka is much more potent than a stranger's bia of Shaloi Kedarka, and it will actually make her into a Ba'ula. Mahi, what is this machlokes Rabbi and the Rabbanon as to whether or not a bia Shaloi Kedarka makes a woman into a Ba'ula? The Tanya we learned. You have a Naira Hamuras, and Bo Allah Yud Anoshim. What if she was mezana with 10 people? They all should be chayiv skila, but adaini besula, and she's still a besula. How could a woman have 10 bias and still be a besula? Obviously, they were all boilish like a darka, kulam beskila. Since she has retained her status as a besula throughout, every single person is going to be mechuyev skila because each of them was boil a nair hamurasa besula. But Rabbi Omer no, Omerani harishon beskila. The first one will get skila because the first one was boil a besula. But the kulam bechenek, the rest of them will only get chenek because they were no longer boil a basula, they were boil a buula. So even the Rabbanan who hold that she's still a basula, that's only because she was novellas from strangers. But everybody agrees that if she was novellas by her husband, she's considered a buula. Amar Nachbar Yitzchak, Mishkachas law, could go in Shekitcha B'shtar. You know how you would have a case of Nayam Urasa? If he made Kiddush Shtar. Because Shtar, maybe Kesef needs Be'iyah. But shtar wouldn't need bia because hoyel v'goymer umaitzi, since the shtar is so powerful, it could create a full gerushin that nothing else can do. Goymer umachnis, it wouldn't need a bia to complete a kedushin. Okay, so that takes care of that shaila. So what you see very clearly is something very, very interesting. You see that basula is not bedavke a physical issue because we're saying that the bia shaloi kedarka of a husband gives her the halachic status of a bula. No, this brasha doesn't move, but the Gemara is saying that. So but that happens to be a fascinating yisoid that it's not toilet in the definition of a basula is not a virgin. That's what it means. Okay. Rashi says, we're actually learning it out of a pasuk. So Zok to Gemara. Now let's go back to the machloikis between Rebbe, who learns it from Kiyigach Ish Isha Ubala, and from our Gemara. So Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, Hay Ubala my Ovedle. Rabbi Yochanan learns Kiddushin Bia from our Gemara Behibulas Baal. So why does the pasuk say Kiyigach Ish Isha Ubala? What do you learn from that pasuk? Gemara Humi Boile Zu Niklis Bibia, Vein Amaria Niklis Bibia. Ubala is just to tell you a dik Ubala. An Isha you could be kaina with Bia, but you cannot be kaina an Amma of Ria with Bia. So Kedai Chamina, I would have otherwise thought that maybe you could be kaina an Amma of Ria with Bia. Tesi Bikadu Chayrim Yavama. Umay Yavama Shay Niklis Bekesef, Niklis Bibia, Zu an Amma of Ria. Shay Niklis Bekesef, you could be kaina with Kesef. And you didn't Shay Niklis Bibia? Dr. Mara, why would I need a pasuk to tell me that an Amma cannot be Niklis Bibia? That Kavachomer is not a good Kavachomer. I would have never thought that an Amma could be Niklis Bibia. Because Mali Yavama can shkuko by Medes. You know why you could be kind of Yavama with Bia? It's because she's halfway his already. But an Amma is a total stranger. Dr. Gemara, okay, a different reason. Referring to an Amma of Ria, the Torah says, so we're talking about another wife. Acheres means you took a wife. If you took a wife in addition to this Amma, so right away we're comparing her to a wife. Hikija cost of Lacheres. Ma Cheres, just like a wife, Mikni Bibia. Afama Ria Mikni Bibia. Famashmalon Kiyigach Ish Isha Ubala. Davka, a woman, a wife could be Niklas Bibia, not an Amma. Break them over. Rebbe Haisvar Minalai. Rebbe who needs Kiyigach Ish Isha Ubala to tell you about Kiddushin Bia. How is he going to know that an Amma of Ria cannot be Niklas with Bia? It could have said Kiyigach Ish Isha Ubal, but my Ubal law. So you still have that miut. Shemami notarti, Sai B is kaina, and Sai B is only kaina on Isha, but not on Amma. Well, the Rava, the Amar by Rahina Asbury. Rava once said that Barahina explained something to me, and this is what he explained to me. Ki yigach ish Isha ubala, Kiddushin ha mesurin lebia have a Kiddushin, Kiddushin she'ein mesurin lebia lo have a Kiddushin. Rava ran into halacha. What if someone is mekadesh achas mishtei achayos? The halacha is he's not married to either one. Why? Because that's a Kiddushin that could never lead to a Bia. Because if you're a Mekadesh Achas Mishtei Achoyos, and it's not defined who you're Mekadesh, you're usher to both sisters. Because if she's not the one that you married, she's your wife's sister. So that's a Kiddushin that could never come to Bia. So from Kiyik Ish Isha Ubala, we learned that a Kiddushin, She'ein Mesurin L'Bia, is not a Kiddushin at all. Now the problem is, we have these other Limudim that we need to learn from here. Kiddushin Bia, and that an Amma of Ria is not Niklas B'Bia, but we need Ubala to teach you that Kiddushin She'ein Mesurin L'Bia is not a good Kiddushin. Michael Namer. My Ubala. From there we learn both. Because if it said Ubala, I would still learn that you're Dafka Isha's Niklas B'Bia, not an Amma. But Ubala means Kiyigach Ish Isha Ubala. If you marry a woman, you have to be able to be boiler. So from the Ubala, you see that Kiddushin is not a good Kiddushin. Shemamina Kulu. You can learn all of the limudim you need to know from it. Break the more. Okay. Now we discussed how Rabbi Yochanan dealt with Rebbe's pasuk. But how is Rebbe going to deal with the pasuk by Avram Asara, which says Behulas Ball? Rebbe, I Behulas Ball, my Ovidlay. My boyle, Bal Oisa Beula Shaloi Kedarka, Veinacher Oisa Beula Shaloi Kedarka. We have a pasuk that says that even a Bia Shaloi Kedarka of a Baal makes her into a Beul. Break the more. Me Islay, the Rebbe Haisvara. Does Rebbe hold that it makes her into a Beul Shaloi Kedarka? Latanya Boala Yura Nosha Vadai Besula Kulam Beskila. Rebbe Omer Ani Harishan Beskila Kulam Bechenek. So the problem is how would Rebbe hold to that svara? How could Rebbe hold to the svara that it's only the Baal who makes her beula with a bish like a darka, but not anybody else? You see Rebbe Paskin, in fact, that kulam bechenek. So obviously anybody makes her into beula shaloi kedarka. Tomorrow, Moida Rebbe li'niknas the kulu mishalmi. Even though she's considered a beula after the first one, and therefore the second and third perpetrator will not get skila because we don't treat her like a besula, but legabi knas, they still pay knas as if they were ma'anas a besula. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll be mamshich weiter. What's a little bit strange is we're learning Kiddushin Bia will work even with Kiddushin Bia from where? From Sarah, the Hebrew Wilos Baal. How did she become Avram's wife? Through Kiddushin Bia Shalakadaka? The Hebrew Wilos Baal means she became Avram's wife through Kiddushin Bia. Right? We know Rav Mangid. Rav gave somebody Malchus if they were Mekadosh B'Bia. But maybe in the olden days things were different. Before the Torah established Kiddushin Kesef, so it's cool that was the norm then. Shkoyach.